This and every episode of REKT Podcast is brought to you by Beaksy Exchange, an upcoming cryptocurrency exchange built in collaboration with One Market Data. Beaksy is bringing legacy finance speed, power, and sophistication to crypto for the first time. With 225,000 transactions per second per pair, comparable to NASDAQ, 15 order types on day one, with 25 order types on full rollout, and a dedicated customer support team, Beaksy is setting itself apart from the competition. Check out Beaksy today at Beaksy.com and pre-register today at Beaksy.com/registration to get your free Beaksy Exchange tokens. That's Beaksy.com, BEAXY.com. One.
I'm JW Weatherman, and this is REKT.
Hello and welcome to REKT Podcast. I am Bunchu Betts, all by my lonesome tonight. Chamber is traveling for real life work. Cynthia still on her hiatus, but I am here on my own, just hustling, giving you guys some good content. So I am here with a very special guest, JW Weatherman. JW, how are you?
I'm good. Really good, man. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming on. I have a pressing question that has been bothering me since I came across you. Is J.W. Weatherman at in any way a tip of the cap to J. Walter Weatherman from Arrested Development?
It is.
Yes,
I'm here to teach you some lessons.
That's why you always leave a note.
Exactly.
So we appreciate you coming on. I had been thinking about that since I heard of you. So
just imagine that scene with the blood, splattering, and instead of him saying "leave a note," that's why you always trade with insider information.
There you go. That's perfect. But just to give some context to everyone listening, I had come across JW actually on Peter McCormick's podcast, What Bitcoin Did, and I thought some of the things that he had to say were super interesting and actually really enlightened me a little bit. So we'll get into it in a little bit here, but I wanted to kind of start by prefacing it with some of your views, JW, are not the views that the majority out there might have. I'm sure you get that quite a bit.
What are you talking about? I'm completely mainstream, man. I've never had an original thought. I'm the definition of an NPC, Democrat or Republican, all the way.
Well, like I said, so, I'm just prefacing the audience with they might hear some things that typically, they wouldn't hear on this show. But I want to talk about a little bit why it was important that I thought you should come on, because you have a course called 10 Hours of Bitcoin. Let's just start there. Talk about what 10 Hours of Bitcoin is.
Yeah, so the goal of the course, and it's been kind of an evolution of what I've been working on over the last year. But the goal of the course is to take somebody and bring them up to speed on what Bitcoin is, what cryptocurrencies are, in 10 hours. It's not realistic to try to get somebody up to speed in an hour. There's just too much material. And over time, we figured 100 hours is just too much to ask of most people. Most people have kids and wives and jobs, and 100 hours of investment to figure out what's going on with cryptocurrencies is probably a little too steep. So we decided, 10 hours is a reasonable chunk of time to invest to get a reasonable orientation and grasp of what's happening. And so then what we've done is we've just curated it. So I did have the Bitcoin threat model and the human threat model and a 3-hour lecture series that's part of that, but we also have kind of an introduction to Bitcoin, the forward from Seyfedin Amousa's book, and a couple essays from Nick Szabo, and then some talks from Elizabeth Stark at Lightning Labs. and then there's a couple other talks on there as well. One about simplicity, the programming language that's coming to Bitcoin, and oh man, I'm forgetting what the other one is. But there's I think one or two other talks. But in total, it's about 10 hours of time that you need to invest. And the goal, and I think we've done it pretty well, is you walk away with a really solid foundation for investing in general, but specifically also investing in cryptocurrencies.
So where did this idea come from? So I actually, I heard John Peters' podcast, and I was telling you before the show, like I drive a ton for work, and so I'm like, all right, I have 10 hours to spare. I've obviously jumped down the rabbit hole of crypto in the last 2 years, year and a half, whatever, and so I'm like, all right, let me do this. And so I actually went through all 10 hours in the car, very easy to consume, mobile friendly, so I hooked it up, and it was a lot of podcasts and talks and things like that. So I found it super helpful, which is why I wanted to have you come on. But where did the whole idea come from? How did it come to be, and where is it going?
So originally, my background is in software security and doing software startups, but I had never really been on social media. I'm in my mid 40s, so by the time that Twitter kicked off and Facebook kicked off, I wasn't super excited about it. I was doing other stuff, so I never got around to messing with social media much until I got interested in Bitcoin. So about a year ago, I did the Bitcoin threat model, and I was kind of expecting to find some flaws, to be honest, but that was the beginning of me going down the rabbit hole. A threat model is like a systematic security design review of a chunk of software, open source project, something like that. So that was sort of my first project that was Bitcoin related, and I wanted people to read it, so I put it up on Reddit, and I put it up on Twitter, and then I realized, like, man, everybody's on Twitter. So I started, trying to figure out social media for the first time. So that was an interesting, just sort of cultural experience in and of itself. But at a certain point, I created a course, which is where the lecture series came from. But my main motivation there was because I think in some ways I just hadn't learned how to use lists and block on Twitter appropriately. So I was trying to think, like, how do I filter out all these morons? Like, there's really interesting people I want to talk to, and then there is just, for every one of those, there's 150 complete goofballs that just waste my time. So I thought, all right, I'll create a course that will cover the basics of economics and, enough of the technology, get everybody oriented, and then people that pay for the course, and I'll charge $300. People that pay for the course will be people that basically filtered out, right? Like I almost could have charged money for anything because the morons, they don't have 75 cents to throw at you. So if you charge anything, it's a really good filter. But I did put a lot of time into it, and I think I made it worthwhile. And it came with like an hour of sort of one-on-one consulting time for whatever project you were working on. So we had a lot of people that were doing startups and picked my brain around that sort of stuff. But we had about 50 people, maybe closer to 60 total, that went through the course and paid $300 and got the lectures. And we had Eric Lombroso show up and do a Q&A, and Saifedean Moose show up and do like a 1 hour Q&A just to kind of recover the same material, but from a different voice. And it was a lot of fun. And I actually it accomplished what I wanted to. I got to know some really great folks out of that. So that was kind of the first version of it, was that paid version, but it was kind of, it was a bit of a pain, and it didn't cover everything that I wanted it to cover. And Bitcoin's interesting because it's like feast or famine. So we had like 50 people sign up, and then it was like maybe a couple a month. And at a couple a month, it's not, $600. It's like, it's more hassle than it's worth to try to just go back and forth, get paid and do all that sort of stuff. So I really wanted to make it free at that point, because it had served its purpose of kind of creating a network for myself in the space. But I also wanted to fill in some gaps. So after some kind of trial and error, we realized, all right, we'll make it 10 hours. We'll use the lectures that we had from the course, and then we'll put these other great talks in there and have a really good holistic sort of free experience. And my goal, my hope is that if you are not completely comfortable in Bitcoin, like you don't consider yourself an expert, or you're completely new, that this is the place to go, because I'm actually not responsible for the content at this point. Colin, or H.A. Clown on Twitter, and Rollo McFlugel, who has a libertarian podcast. Those guys went through the course, and so they're responsible for the site moving forward. So at some point, I'm sure somebody's going to create stuff better than what I have created, and they'll be brutal about it. They'll take my stuff down and throw the better stuff up. So it's a highly curated spot, is the intention of it.
Yeah, I mean, and I think just to reiterate what you just said there, I mean, I think it's hard to be an expert in Bitcoin. It is hard to get started in Bitcoin, and I think this 10 hours of education are very helpful to anybody. I mean, you can be anyone from beginner to intermediate to expert, and there's definitely something to learn in there, which is what I found awesome. And obviously, I by no means am an expert, so I found it extremely helpful. So pretty cool free education there. I recommend everybody check it out. One of the things that I really enjoyed about it, and I'd love for you to take a second on this too, is, and I'm going to see if I can start somewhere else here. So you would call yourself a Bitcoin maximalist, would you?
Yeah. I actually wrote the Bitcoin Maximalist Manifesto. So if you do a Google search for that, some other people had some input, but I did the first draft, so I'll still take credit for it. That's
awesome. So the reason I bring that up is because you have some very staunch stances on other cryptocurrencies, and whether or not they're scams or scammers run by scammers, everything like that. But you have what I thought was a pretty valid reason for, having those stances when you listen to your thoughts on economics and speculation and all of those things, and kind of what is money and where that, that whole thing comes from. So can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that's a super important thing, for people to understand about anything before they even start looking at crypto.
Yeah, totally. So I will preface this with saying that 30 to 70% of the people listening to this are going to think I'm insane.
Yes.
And the reason for that is that it's a complicated topic. So if I was to try to explain, brain surgery, and I only had 15 minutes to do it, and I did my best, I would probably sound a little bit insane if you didn't have any idea how the brain worked. So if you've never taken an economics course, if you've never read any Austrian economics, if you haven't gone through, Mises or Rothbard or any of these guys, there are so many blue or red pills that are all tied together in economics and in the topics that we're about to sort of crack into, that it's going to be like talking to a 9/11 truther for the first time, right? And I don't get the luxury of not sounding like a crazy person, because the way to do that right is to start at the very basics, and that's what we do on the 10hoursofbitcoin.com site, right? Like if you go through my stuff there, I imagine that after you listen to my talk with Peter on what Bitcoin did, it was like interesting, but you thought I might be insane. But then after going through the systematic, case by case, layer by layer building of the economic argument, you might go, oh, well, I disagree with him on this point, but he's definitely not insane, right? It's a very well laid out systematic argument.
Correct.
So anybody that's listening now, they're going to have that same experience. There's the disclaimer.
I tried to warn them.
Okay, so the basic issue with understanding what's going on with Bitcoin and these other cryptocurrencies, there's a few different sort of disciplines or experiences that overlap together. One is economics and just understanding what money is. Another is sort of understanding what a startup is or a software project and how that works. And then the other other than like what money is and what a software startup is open source software. Open source software is weird, and it's hard to get your head around if you haven't actually experienced it. So those three things overlap, and I think that has created enough confusion for scammers and con artists to just run wild in this space. That combined with a lot of money, because there is some really amazing stuff happening. So I'll talk about the money first. So the reason that you have to understand what money is that you have to understand what Bitcoin is about. The purpose of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies is to create a new money. Just like if we were trying to, if we're Tesla and we're trying to create a new car, a better car, you really have to understand what a car is, why it functions the way that it functions, like what problems that it solves. If you've never seen a car before, it's going to be really hard for you to understand that Tesla's a legitimate company and some other, goofy little startup that's making a bunch of false claims is not, right? You kind of have to be a car expert to be able to tell the difference. And in cryptocurrency, you have to be a money expert. At least you have to really, at a pretty technical level, understand what money is, in order to understand how we're going to go about creating a better money, or why Bitcoin is a better money. At a high level, Bitcoin is a better money because it's harder to steal. So if I was going to compare that to US dollars, US dollars are already digital, so it's not just about programmable money. That's, digital, programmable are synonyms, right? It's very easy to make dollars programmable. But they're really easy to steal in that somebody can hack your bank account and take the money out, but also the bank can just take the money out, or the FBI can just freeze your account and take the money, right? You get charged with a crime and you're like, that's okay, I have a couple $100,000 saved up for my legal defense. Boom, it's frozen. You don't have access to it. And then you start realizing, oh, you know what? My money wasn't actually secure when it was in that bank account. And then there's another huge problem with our current monetary system, and that is that not only can they steal the money just by freezing or whatever if you're politically unpopular, but there's also the tool that they have, which is the printing press on our money, right? So the Federal Reserve decides, they say they target interest rates. At the end of the day, what it means is that they can increase the amount of dollars in production, right, or dollars in existence. And as they do that, things get more expensive. So when I was a kid, a candy bar was like 45 cents. I think last time I bought a candy bar, it was $1.25, and that's because the number of dollars, it's not because they haven't gotten better factories, right? Like, it's cheaper to make a candy bar now than it was before. The farming is cheaper, tons of stuff is automated, the factories that package them are better. Everything about that should make that candy bar 25 cents now, right? I'm in my mid 40s when I was buying candy bars at 5 years old. There's been 40 freaking years of economic growth and development and human creativity and effort and tooling that has gone into making pretty much the same candy bar I was buying when I was a kid. So it should be a lot cheaper. That's what technology usually brings about. But instead, it's, more expensive. And that's because the number of dollars that exists have gone up. Now, there's all kinds of like court historian BS stories that you get indoctrinated through, high school and especially in college to make you think that this is a good idea that's actually for your benefit, that these people steal your money through inflation. But that's a problem. And so the way that Bitcoin has solved this is the guys that created Bitcoin, the way that they solved this is they came up with a way to create money that can't be inflated by a government, that's government hard, government resistant money. So that's the whole purpose of it. And by making it government hard and government resistant, they can put a total cap on it. We can have 21 million of these things forever. And we can also make the system, and we also have to have the system be such that nobody can take your account balance unless they have your password, essentially, right? They have your private keys. So that's the context, and that's the purpose of Bitcoin. So that's sort of like, okay, we're doing a startup to create money, right? Perspective. Then the money itself perspective is, well, what the heck is money? And I'll just say briefly, it's a medium of exchange, it's a store of value, and it's a unit of account. It's all three of those things. Those are not separate things like the scammers would have you believe. Those three things describe what is money. And the third one, the unit of account, is means that when we talk about value, like, I'll do this for you for X number of dollars per hour, or my car is worth that, or my retirement fund has this in it, we're measuring value. And the thing that we measure value in right now, if you live in the United States, is dollars. It's weird that it's in we have different units of account in different countries. That's not normal. That's not a normal market phenomenon. But setting that aside, if you're in the United States, you measure value in dollars. We use dollars as our unit of account. It's the third thing that we use to measure how much your car is worth and how much my retirement fund is worth. And that, because of the way that it works, just like a meter has to be one thing. We can't have a meter that's, some meters are smaller, some meters are bigger, some of them are wavy and some of them are straight. No, a meter has to be one thing. If we're going to measure value, if it's going to function as a unit of account, it has to be one thing. So that takes, again, a lot more time to build up and really help people understand in the course. But if you put those two things together, right, money has to be one thing, and we're trying to create money in Bitcoin, you start realizing, okay, this is a winner take all thing, right? If it has to be one thing, only one can live, it's the Highlander, everybody else is going to die. And then if you have something competing with Bitcoin, it has to be government hard, right? Because you understand the problem is creating a money that can't be influenced by the government. It's the only purpose of this stuff. And it has to also credibly be able to beat Bitcoin. If it has no chance of actually beating Bitcoin and it's not government hard, then you start going, okay, well, this is like that, car company that says they're going to beat Tesla, but they're making all of these claims that just don't make any sense, right? It goes from a legitimate startup that may have a chance to, oh, wait a minute, this is probably just flat out fraud. And we haven't even gotten to any false claims yet, but just knowing that it has to beat Bitcoin and it has to be government hard to even be on the playing field of doing that helps you eliminate probably 85% of all the frauds that are out there.
That takes out pretty much everything.
It does. I mean, we could look at what are the other ones that are out there, right? So you have Litecoin. Litecoin, their whole sales pitch has always been, we're going to be silver to Bitcoin's gold. Well, wait a minute. A unit of account, right, has to be one thing. So they're kind of taking this quirk of the coexistence of silver and gold that caused a lot of problems in history, incidentally. But they're taking the fact that gold had certain limitations, and so silver was used. So we kind of didn't have the unit of account in a pure way for a while there, and they're using that as a justification. But since these things are digital, it doesn't have the same limitations, right? We could subdivide Bitcoin down to sub-Satoshis. So we don't need to have, which is the reason that we had silver, right? We had silver because if you tried to buy a soda with gold, it would be a tiny, tiny little flake. That was a problem. The better solution to that actually was banking. It wasn't to use silver. It was to just put our gold in banks and then use bank notes, because using silver and gold at the same time caused all kinds of trouble. But they'll use that to say, okay, well, Litecoin has value, or its transaction speed is faster, or whatever. And if you dig into any one of those claims, either on the economic side or the technical side, it's just nonsense right off the bat. And that, we could go through the list, right? We could just bring up CoinMarketCap and just run down all of these top 20, and they're all just laughable.
So I've heard you talk about Litecoin, Ethereum, Monero, even as far as these cryptos that are trying to be something that you believe that they can't be by definition. Is that correct?
Well, I think it's even worse because I think they know that they can't be it by definition. So like Monero is one that is still not considered by everybody to be a fraud. Litecoin at this point, most people are like, oh yeah, that's a fraud. But Monero is still sort of in this golden, period. For whatever reason, I guess it's because the scaling debate is totally dead and the privacy debate is still going on. So there's a little bit more excuse for those guys to seem legitimate. But what I would say about Monero, for example, is if you just listen to what the promoters of Monero say and the way that they sell Monero, you can know that they don't even believe that they have a chance at beating Bitcoin, right? They'll never come out and say, Monero is more secure than Bitcoin. Monero is a better money than Bitcoin. In fact, they're kind of greasy at this point, and they'll say, oh, you shouldn't even invest in Monero. But, they'll still talk about its virtues, right? But they'll never want to, this is a winner-take-all situation, right? And they'll never want to really compare it to Bitcoin. They don't mind comparing to stuff like Ethereum and Litecoin. But you'll notice Ethereum and Litecoin, they do the same game, right? They will never acknowledge that in order for money to function as money, it needs to be one thing. And they'll, support any court historian. Like, if you want to make money as an economics person in sort of, broader academia, what you want to do is you want to get close to the Federal Reserve, and you want to tell all kinds of stories about how it's for everybody's benefit that the Federal Reserve prints a bunch of money and gives it to their friends. Like, that's the only business model that exists, right, in economics right now. So if you want to make money as sort of an intellectual in the cryptocurrency space, what you really need to do is you need to get close to one of these cryptocurrencies, or maybe many of these cryptocurrencies, and really try to push the idea that we can have many monies at one time. Now, academics will struggle with that because even if they're, Keynesian court historians that will say the Federal Reserve should be printing money, they still know that, whoa, we know the difference between money and barter, right? Money is when you have something that you use to facilitate all these trades. Barter is by definition when you have multiple things to facilitate all these trades, and that causes a lot of problems. That's why we want to have money. But if you're in the cryptocurrency space for any period of time, you'll hear a lot of people pushing this many monies narrative, right? That you can have multiple monies. So we don't have to, like, Monero can coexist with Bitcoin, right? That's a really important concept that they'll push.
So, I mean, I guess what's the difference then, kind of, you had mentioned it a little while back, that, we have all these different currencies in different countries, and, but they're not necessarily competing currencies, whereas here you're talking about all these different currencies that I guess are, for lack of a better word, trying to compete with each other. What's the difference between that?
So there's a couple ways that you can kind of, in a perfect world, I would take you through all of the problems in barter and then, bring you, and I know that you know this because you went through the course, but there's a few different ways you can kind of try to take a big shortcut and hack at it. So that's what I'll do. One way is you can look at money as a language or a protocol. And the reason that languages and protocols are the same is that the whole purpose is to facilitate communication or facilitate exchange between other people, right? Like, we both have to be able to speak English for us to have this conversation. And our computers right now, they both have to be able to speak TCP/IP, which is the internet protocol, to be able to talk to each other so that we can record this podcast. Bitcoin or money is like that, in the sense that if you wanted to pay me, or let's say that I wanted to pay you as somebody that wants to promote my MathBot project, and you're going to do advertising on the podcast, it is a lot easier for me to pay you if we both speak the same language when it comes to money. In other words, if you accept US dollars and I store US dollars and I accept US dollars, that is the most smooth sort of communication that we could have, right? It's very easy. What do you want? $75? All right. That sounds good. Done, right? I have the $75. You take the $75. If you were in another country and you say, I want 250 francs, that is not as smooth. That adds friction to the communication, right? I have to go do the math, figure out what's the conversion rate from dollars to francs. And then I have to find somebody that will take my dollars, that will turn them into francs, and then will give you francs, right? So that's not ideal. And what we should expect is that over time, the more ideal setup should replace the less ideal, right? The more efficient, in general, when humans are interacting, if they find a tool that works better, they tend to use that tool that works better. And we can see through human history that that languages, they expand across borders, right? They don't just stop at a border. And over time, if we trade together a lot, I'll either start adopting francs or you'll start adopting US dollars would be what we would expect to happen. And the way that networks tend to work is one of those things works better, right? So it's not a fair playing field, because let's say that the French government prints francs faster than the U.S. government. Well, over time, you're going to see your purchasing power decrease faster in francs than dollars, and you're going to say to yourself, "Well, I'm already trading with JW dollars. I think I'm just going to anytime I do business with JW, I'm going to accept dollars and just hold those, because those are going to hold value better than my francs." And so over time, and actually over a relatively short period of time, because we're talking about millions of transactions a day, right? This is not like, you don't have to invest 10 years in order to learn English properly. You just have to go, oh, dollars hold their value better, done, right? There's no onboarding, there's a little bit of hassle, but it's not comparable to learning a new language. But it's similar in the sense that you get a lot of benefits out of being on the same thing. So those sort of things where the barrier to adoption is low, but there is a network effect. It's more like social media than learning a new language. So when everybody, got sick of MySpace and ran over to Facebook, and then a lot of people ran from Facebook to Twitter, a lot of this stuff happens within weeks, right? Like hundreds of thousands of people just pour between one and the other thing because there's not a lot of barrier to entry. That's how we would expect something like money to work. And historically, we can see that that's how it's worked, right? If you trade with a group of people and you find out that they have a money that holds value longer, maybe works better, subdivides better, whatever, you tend to adopt that. And that is what we would expect to happen. And that is what would happen naturally. I mean, there's a lot of people in China right now that are doing everything they can to get out of the RMB and preferably get their hands on US dollars. If you're in Venezuela, you're dying for US dollars. You don't really care that, it's not about teams. Or Bitcoin. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Hopefully soon enough we'll all be able to see that, yeah, everybody did coalesce on Bitcoin because it was the most secure, most functional money. And as people realized that, they adopted it. I think that's what it will look like when we look back.
So when you talk about, I think one of the really important things here is also defining for maybe some of our non-technical audience, or aka myself, when you say more secure, how does that differ from Bitcoin to those 1,000 other cryptocurrencies out there, and what makes Bitcoin the most secure?
So the big breakthrough with creating Bitcoin was realizing that you could use proof of work to prevent double spends, and then you could also use proof of work in the network to control the total amount of cryptocurrency in existence. So after every 2 weeks, the Bitcoin network software basically looks and says, okay, how many blocks have been created? And if it's been more than expected, it raises the difficulty. Less than expected, it lowers the difficulty. And because you get new Bitcoin in the block reward, that controls the total number of Bitcoin that are being created. And then every 4 years, it cuts that number in half. So we end up with only about 21 million Bitcoin that will ever exist. All of that innovation is centered around this idea of proof of work. And what proof of work is, it's taking something in the world outside of the system that's valuable. In this case, really electricity, computational power, but the biggest part of that is electricity. It's taking something valuable and it's provably destroying it, right? It's in order to create a block that says these are the order of transactions, you have to destroy something that's worth a lot of real world money. And the way that is, or the reason that's valuable, is that in order to attack the system, in order to say, no, you were wrong when you said the transactions were in that order, it requires an incredible amount of money to be spent in the real world buying valuable things, all these electrons that are stored up and ready to do work, and then destroying those, right? in order to attack the system. So it's a really, really brilliant system, and it is the breakthrough that Satoshi introduced. So now the question is, how are all of these other cryptocurrencies doing it? Well, they're basically pretending to do it. They're not actually doing it. Because the reason that Bitcoin is hard to attack is that it consumes an incredible amount of electricity. And this is really important. It consumes it at the height of human capability. If you have a cryptocurrency that's destroying $1 million of electricity per day in order to order transactions, you could either spend $1 million of electricity per day to screw up that network to attack it, or you could say, well, those idiots are not even using cutting edge tools. I can just invest, $100 million into building devices that are more efficient than what these monkeys are using, and now I can destroy the network by only spending $10,000 a day, or I can control it or overwrite transactions or do whatever I want. So all of the other cryptocurrencies are playing in that category. They are not destroying enough electricity at the height of human capability to actually prevent attacks. And Monero is a good example. They, on a regular basis, hard fork, and they use checkpoints. And basically what that means is that they're not relying on proof of work. They're relying on proof of Fluffy Pony, who tells people what the checkpoints are. And if they get attacked, which actually they're a good example for this reason as well. Some bad guys said, okay, we want to take control of Monero. And so we're going to invest a little bit of money in hardware that will allow us to control the network. That would be a big problem if they were actually using proof of work to secure the network. But they're just pretending to, because as soon as that came out, Fluffy Pony said, hey, we're just going to change the proof of work. So they remain really, really weak. And what I mean by proof of work is the algorithm that is used to secure the network. They just changed the algorithm. So it's really, really weak, but it's almost not worth attacking because it's so weak that it's not even interesting, right? It's like, it's such security theater that it's not even worth pushing over because it wasn't really even there in the first place, if that makes sense. And all of the cryptocurrencies other than Bitcoin fall cleanly into that category.
So this is kind of reminds me of, I heard you talk a little bit about ASIC resistance. That would kind of fall into that category, right? You pretty much think that's a myth.
Well, yeah. So this was a big part of the Litecoin narrative back in the day. I mean, I didn't live through it, but I've gone back and looked at how these guys marketed themselves because it's kind of fascinating to see the way a Ponzi scheme kicks off. These frauds that, especially ones that have been around for a long time, like I'm looking forward to the Theranos day, right? There's going to be a day where a lot of these guys are going to be looking at jail time, and everybody's going to be saying, "Wow, that's really weird. JW was the only one that thought that there was actually anything criminal going on here." But it's coming. I would not want to be any of these guys that think they have $1 billion, because Ponzi schemes don't end well for the front man. But Litecoin in particular, one of the narratives that they used was that they wanted to be ASIC resistant. And what they meant by that is basically they wanted to come up with an algorithm or use an algorithm that couldn't be calculated efficiently by specialized hardware. This is, I mean, if you take a step back and just think about this is really, really stupid, because what they're saying is we're going to create a problem where it's not more efficient to solve it with specialized hardware. Like, forget about computers for a minute. Just think about the natural universe around you. Does it even seem conceivable that there could be a problem where better tools wouldn't help you solve that problem faster and with less work? Like, it's almost like you can tell how stupid the idea is because I'm having to contradict myself, right? Like, better tools don't help you solve the problem. Well, then they're not really better tools by definition, right? But that's the kind of nonsense that these guys used. And it's still, a fairly popular concept. I'm sure there'll be plenty of cryptocurrencies launched this year that claim to be ASIC resistant. But the reason that they're doing that is they don't want to compare head to head with Bitcoin, because there's no chance, right? There's been a decade of R&D that's gone into building the most efficient devices to solve this specific set of problems. And that's important because an attacker is not going to be able to put in, a few $1 million and build a device to attack the network that's more efficient than the devices that we already have to secure the network.
So in your opinion, then, when someone's kind of saying that it's ASIC resistant, it's almost more to draw in users essentially, right? Because to use their network as a proof of work network, correct?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's one of those decisions that you look at if you have some technical competence and you go, oh, this is really a bad move for security. But if you have some marketing chops, you also look at it and go, but it's very, very good for marketing. Because if you are, some random dude that's interested in this cryptocurrency, and you can, in theory, burn electricity on your Mac laptop and get a little bit of Grin or Monero or Litecoin or whatever, that's way more attractive than Bitcoin, where, you can't get any Bitcoin unless you buy specialized hardware, and it's so competitive that it's really going to be hard to make any money. There's so many millions of dollars that have been poured into it that if unless you're doing something like you're going up and getting really cheap electricity from geothermal and setting up a real professional operation, you're not going to be able to compete. That's kind of discouraging. It should be encouraging because you actually want a lot of stuff securing your money. But if you're just, kind of dabbling in it, the idea of free money made by your computer is very attractive, right? Especially for the demographic of people that these guys target, that, are not doing the math, so to speak. So it's great for marketing, right? If you can tell people, oh yeah, you just fire up a miner and you're going to get a little bit of this, this magic stuff, on your laptop, you don't really have to invest anything. That's a pretty great way to market something. So I don't think it's a coincidence that it's a really good way to attract new people and a really bad way to secure the network to anybody that knows what's going on.
That's really interesting, man. I think people probably at this point think some of the stuff you've said is crazy, but I think that they probably think some of the stuff you said is pretty accurate and important. And so one other big kind of broad topic I want to cover that, I thought was interesting from the 10 hours of Bitcoin is, kind of those introductory steps was, I think a lot of people would say that, sure, Bitcoin's going to be number one. It's the best thing. I only trade these alts to gain more Bitcoin. And essentially what they call that, or what normal people would call that, is speculation. And you kind of cover speculation in a really interesting way that I feel like most people don't think about in the course. Can you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't take credit for these insights. This is definitely just classical Austrian economics, Mises, Rothbard.
Yeah, but I think I think there's probably so many people out there that don't think about it or have never taken a economics course or whatever. I mean, I have, and I still wasn't thinking about it that way. You know what I mean?
Well,
so
yeah,
I think it's important to kind of bridge the gap between those economic, those big economic ideologies and what crypto is trying to do and what Bitcoin is trying to do.
Totally. Yeah. One thing that I will say is that if you're anywhere around the world and you take an economics course in college, you're going to get Keynesian economics and maybe a little Chicago School of Economics sprinkled in. And the key ingredient to both of those schools of thought is that inflation is wonderful. So it's something that all the governments around the world are going to want you to believe. And it's no coincidence that particular scam narrative has been universal across the globe, with the exception of countries that don't have central banks stealing from their citizens, but none of those countries exist anymore. So I can say with confidence that you got indoctrinated. You didn't get taught economics. If you want to learn economics, I mean, the 10hoursofbitcoin.com is obviously, a good place to start, but, if you don't want to hear it from me, or you don't like the particular selection of resources that I put up there, the classic resource is Human Action by Ludwig von Mises. If you can be disciplined enough to read that thing from cover to cover, you're going to that's where you're just going to probably get hit with a really disturbing red pill that will be good for you in the long run. Every 15 pages of this massive treatise, but to take a step back a little bit and just say, what is speculation or investing? It's really this is another area that's really tough, because I'm going to sound really insane, because
that's why it's I totally agree, but let's do it.
Okay, so in addition to wanting you to believe, like, let's just say there's a third world dictator, right? Let's strip off the patriotism that everybody has for a minute. Imagine you're in Bak, and in Bak, there's this third world dictator, and he's got control of the territory, and he's trying to figure out ways to take advantage of the population and take their money as quickly as possible. Taxation is obvious, but the problem with taxation is that it results in uprisings, because people can see exactly what's being stolen from them. It's very direct. The next best way to take your money is through inflation. So if I can force you, if I'm the head of Bak and I can force you to use my money, but then I can print more of it, that's great, because you don't really understand it. It's a little bit complicated, and you don't see the effects of my theft. It's not as direct as taxation. If you look at your paycheck and it says 1,000 and then it says 600 or 400, you get pissed off. But if your paycheck says 1,000, and you don't know that I just printed 100 million Bak coins, then you still feel good about that until years later when you go to buy a candy bar and you're like, this is funny. And by that point, you're probably not as murderous about it. So that is a preferred method for fleecing a population. And it has these great side effects, and one of which is that it allows me not only as the dictator to take your money, but I can control the pace of the economy. I can create these boom and bust cycles. So if I print a bunch of money, the interest rates will go low. Everybody will get excited. They'll think that they have more money because that money will flow through the economy. They'll start investing and building bridges and building factories and all this sort of stuff. At a certain point, I'm going to be forced to do this, but that's okay, because it's actually to my advantage. I need to stop printing more money, or at least slow the rate at which I print money, and that causes a recession or an economic bust. And the reason for that is that that's the period where everybody goes, oh my gosh, I built this factory because I thought there were that many people that wanted to buy red shoes, and now that I see now that the money is not being printed, now that inflation isn't really high, turns out there wasn't a whole lot of demand for that. So we saw that in the housing crisis in the United States in 2008. A bunch of money was being printed. It was sloshing all over the economy, and people thought, oh my gosh, there's a huge demand for these McMansions. So a bunch of McMansions were built, and then the Fed had to stop printing money as rapidly, and people realized, whoa, I'm not as rich as I thought I was. I had $15,000 in the bank, but now for some reason everything I'm buying is way more expensive. So maybe I can't afford to do this McMansion. And that's the bust in the boom bust cycle. And during that period of time, it's bad for everybody except for the people that knew that it was going to happen. So the dictator in this third world country, what they can do is they can when the economy is hot, they can sell a bunch of stuff, right? They can be invested in a bunch of stocks, a bunch of projects, whatever. But before the bust sets in, they can move back to cash. And then when the bust happens, the cash, even though it's been inflated, it's going to hold its value better than all these stocks and bonds that are about to fall over on their face, or these assets like real estate that have been really built up. And then you can take that cash after the bust sets in. When it's going to stop, and this is really key, because you're the one that controls the printing press. You decide when the boom happens, you decide when the bust happens, and you decide when the new boom can happen again. You'd think that you would just want to stay in boom forever, but the problem with that is hyperinflation. If you keep printing money rapidly all the time, eventually you're Venezuela, and then you have uprising on your hand, just like with excessive taxation. So So you do need to stop, but you know when you're going to stop. So you can make trades based on that knowledge. Basically, you can sell high and then you can buy low during the bust, but you can do it relatively quickly before the next boom starts because you know that you're starting to print money. So that's a really good way. That's actually even better than just through inflation, stealing people's stuff and stealing their money, but you really need people to be invested in order to do that. If you have a lot of people that are just holding dollars, that's not great, right? Like our grandparents' generation, they would just stuff dollars in their mattress. So they weren't as susceptible to being fleeced through the boom and bust cycle. So with a couple generations of indoctrination, what I want to do as that dictator is convince you that your retirement fund has to be in the stock market, has to be invested in companies, stocks and bonds, things that go up really high and come down really high during this boom and bust.
Interesting. And so how would you relate that to, kind of trading these cryptocurrencies and speculation and things like that?
Yeah, good. Thanks for bringing me back to okay, so yeah, there's just a lot of ground to cover.
Yeah, I hear you, man.
Okay, so now let's look at investing in general. If you're the Federal Reserve, one of the reasons that you're such a good investor in your buddies, or I shouldn't say the Federal Reserve, I'm trying to talk about Mbakbak and the dictators so that all of our patriotic indoctrination doesn't kick in and we can't think clearly. Okay, so in Guyana or whatever, although there's probably some people from Guyana right now that have been in public school for 25 years that are like, no, Guyana is such a...
We're huge in Guyana.
Yeah. All right. So one of the reasons that the dictator is so successful is that he has insider information. He knows when the money supply is going to be increased or decreased. Or if you want to look at it a different way, he knows when the interest rates are going to go up and come down because he's actually in control of that. So nobody is going to beat him as an investor, right? Because he has inside knowledge, right? Insider trading is nothing compared to having insider information on what's going to happen to interest rates. It's solid gold. But there's always multiple levels to sort of this, there's always like people at the top and people at the bottom and a bunch of layers in between. So if you can't be the dictator, maybe you can be buddies with the dictator and he'll give you a heads up once all of his trades are done so that you can make all of your trades. And then if you can't be that guy, you can be that guy's friend, right? So it creates this hierarchy of connections at the center where the information starts, like the decision makers actually are, and it slowly flows out, and eventually it hits just normal people, right? But by that time, all of the trades, all of the opportunity to make money on these trades, it's been fully exhausted by the time that the grocery clerk finds out about it. So the same thing happens in a lot of other places. And so what I try to help people understand in the course is that you never want to make a trade. You never want to make an investment unless you know something that the market doesn't. Because let's say, for example, that you said, "Hey, I'm going to buy Tesla stock because I guess I have Tesla on the brain right now. I'm going to buy Tesla stock because I know that they just tested their new batteries and their new batteries are performing 130% better than expected." The question that you would have immediately from me is, well, does everybody else know that the batteries tested 130% better than expected? Because if everybody else knows that information is already priced in, right? If that was a press release that went out to the public 3 days ago, and the stock went up 2%, I would say, well, look, anybody that is seriously investing in Tesla, they've already absorbed that knowledge, right? And so it went up 2% because that's how much more excited about the prospect of the future for Tesla that it represented. Now, if you knew about that study 3 days before it was released to the public, now you can make money, right? Because now you know something that the market doesn't know. And essentially, you know that Tesla stock is more valuable than it's being sold for, right? That's the key. You have to know that something is more valuable than it's being sold for. And that means you have to know something that all of the sellers don't already know. Another quick example real quick is if you were going to buy a coffee shop, and I think I use this example in the course. and the seller says, hey, you should buy my coffee shop because they're putting in a big office building next door. What you should immediately ask yourself is this guy selling me the coffee shop for more money because the office building is going in? Because if he's already figured out that office building is going to bring in 10% more sales per day, he's probably already charging you 10% more for the business than he would have if that office building wasn't going in. Therefore, there's not an opportunity to make money there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I think we saw a good example of it today. Did you see the Ripple hitting Coinbase Pro announcement?
Oh, God.
And then did you see the everybody was calling for, insider trading because it pumped 10, 12%, like the 3 hours before the announcement? Did you see that?
I did not see that. I actually was completely unaware of that because I have blocked just about everybody associated with Ripple or Coinbase.
I had to ask about that because that was one of them that didn't come up when you were on your scam rant. So
no, I got to create another account or just start swimming in that nonsense again to stay up. I mean, it definitely happened with Bitcoin Cash.
Yeah, right, so exactly. That's
the exact same thing. The announcement comes out, and what's funny, though, is that there's a lot of people that are really pissed off about that, but you can find that in basically all industries. It is dirty, and it is crooked, but the more crooked and dirty thing is the concept of insider trading being illegal. That's the real fraud. The real fraud is to convince the normies that this stuff is illegal and doesn't happen, because that allows us to really fleece them, right? This is that indoctrination that if I'm that third world dictator, I definitely want to make sure that gets that becomes part of it. Because if you know that there are people that know more than you, which your grandmother certainly knew. Your great-grandmother would not have been tricked into buying a stock in an electric car company unless she worked at the factory or knew somebody or had some insight, right? She would have instinctively known that wasn't going to work out. But after a few generations of indoctrination and us thinking that insider trading is actually illegal and not practiced, we are just, ready to be fleeced. So you can see that same price movement happen before almost every major announcement. I've worked as an executive in large publicly traded companies, and there are rules. Like I wasn't able to trade for, depending on the size of the announcement, I would have to wait 30 days or 90 days before I could make any trades. But that didn't mean that I couldn't tell my friends if I wanted to. I mean, it did, right. But it didn't, right?
It does, but it doesn't.
And
right, exactly.
Also, you can say that I can't make a trade until more than 30 days before. But I still get to have that information, right? That information might be good 45 days before. So I still have 15 days and that's just being just one of many executives in a big company, right? There are hundreds of people in any company that has access to information that you don't have access to. And that very idea that they wouldn't be using this information to make decisions is insane. But it's something that we have been just washed in since we were in kindergarten, so it makes sense.
So, in your opinion here, obviously, I think anybody that's investing or looking into crypto is here to make money. Are we still in the early no for Bitcoin and crypto, and Bitcoin specifically?
Yeah, I mean, so this is an industry trying to create a new money, and it's trying to be a government-resistant money. So all the lines on the map that say you're using dollars here and then you're using pesos, if those lines can be enforced, then this is a stupid project anyway, right? Because the whole idea is that it's government-resistant. You can't control, when I send you money, you can't control how much total money, and you certainly can't keep it from flowing across borders. So if this whole endeavor has any merit at all, we're trying, and we will, create a global and a secure digital money. So the market for that is massive, right? You would start by taking all of the government dollars in circulation and adding those up, and you would say, okay, that's the bare minimum of the size of this market. But then, because there's a lot of people that avoid, actually everybody that has ever had a basic investing course, they avoid being in government dollars because government dollars are being printed into oblivion, right? That may be faster, maybe slower, depending on where you live. But Bitcoin or a secure currency isn't going to be like that. A secure currency with a fixed supply is going to, some people will say it's deflationary, but that's a kind of a bad use of the word inflation or deflation. But at the end of the day, your purchasing power, if you own a money where it's not being printed into oblivion, is supposed to go up, right? Like I said before, if a candy bar cost me 45 cents and now we have robots making that candy bar, it should go down to, 40 cents, right? And then we have cheaper farming, it should go down to 35 cents, right? Innovation should make things cheaper, which means that if you're saving money, your purchasing power should go up. So when we think about like the amount of our purchasing power going down by 2 or 3%, it's going down by 2 or 3%, and actually that's probably more like 5 or 6, but it's going down at a time where there's tons of tools that are being built that make everything cheaper. So it's actually, if your candy bar is 3% more expensive last year, but the factories now allow the candy bar to be sold in real, economic terms for 5% less, you're actually paying 8% more for your candy bar. You just don't realize it because you only see the difference of, because it should be cheaper and it's actually slightly more expensive. It's that entire amount that's been stolen. So if we don't have that, if we don't have that, you're going to not only be no longer disincentivized from holding dollars for your saving, but you're going to be incentivized and rewarded for saving money. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. So one more thing here before we unpack all this stuff, because we just covered a ton of stuff, and I think it was awesome.
You know what? Before we change the subject, I gotta finish the size of what we're trying to do. Okay.
So go ahead.
So if you add up all of the money, all of the global money in circulation right now, and you divide that by, say, 21 million Bitcoin, you end up around $3 or $5 million dollars per Bitcoin, right? Which is an insane amount, but that's just replacing government fiat, which is very obviously the goal of the project. Now, it may succeed, it may fail, but if it succeeds, we would expect something along those lines as far as the value of an individual Bitcoin. But that's just the sort of baseline, right? Because on top of that, people are running from money, and now they're going to be running into money. And then on top of that, the number of people that are invested in stocks, the number of people that are invested in real estate that will no longer be forced to do so they can stay in money is pretty big. So you have to try to kind of figure out how much of real estate is savings versus not savings, because that savings amount actually will be in money again if it can be, I think. And then there's all kinds of Ponzi's built on that. You've got all these crazy REITs and derivatives and all kinds of nonsense. So my estimate for how early we are is that I don't think it's at all crazy to think that we'll have a $10 million Bitcoin in the future if this all works out. So that'll give you kind of a rough idea of how early I think we are.
So super early.
Super early.
So that's the insider knowledge that we have then, right? Is basically it. So, we've talked a ton about money and what is money and economics and all that stuff. And what projects may or may not be scams because of what money is. Do you see, when we talk about blockchain as a whole, is blockchain the only thing, or is money the only thing blockchain is good for, in your opinion?
Well, so yeah, blockchain is tough because the only reason that we have the term blockchain is because Bitcoin exists. And blockchain is a way to create a list of transactions that are government hard. But in order to do that, you have to reward the miners that are destroying all of that electricity in the currency itself, right? In the coin itself, in this digital currency that's being created. So you really can't have a secure set of blocks. You can't have a blockchain unless it's tied to a digital asset that is super in demand, right? So the idea of creating a blockchain without proof of work just doesn't make any sense at all. We've had those, the closest you could get would be a distributed database with digital signatures. And we've had that for 30, 40 years. It's nothing special. So most of the time when that term gets used, it's just used in a really fraudulent way to have people sort of associate it with Bitcoin and all of the potential that that represents, and then use it for something like voting or real estate or something stupid. So it can't really exist without the currency. And it also doesn't need to, because if you wanted to create transactions, why wouldn't you just use Bitcoin to do that?
In your opinion, you'll be able to do all those same things on Bitcoin at some point, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can do it now, in the sense,
for example, privacy or whatever.
Yeah, so privacy isn't that bad on Bitcoin. I used the example the other day of if you go on websites that sell drugs, they all accept Bitcoin. They might accept something like Grin or Monero, but if you ask them, what do you do more volume in? They're going to tell you they do a lot more volume in Bitcoin. And if they're happy to accept Bitcoin and they're drug dealers, that should tell you that there's probably a reasonable amount of privacy on Bitcoin as it is. But it's getting better. Lightning makes it better. There's a lot of cool stuff going on with CoinJoin and automatic mixing. There's a lot of potential without actually having to change the base protocol at all. And as soon as something makes sense to do on the base protocol, this is the open source software part of it, right? Open source software is weird because if anybody does anything useful, you can just copy that. So right. As soon as, if for example, Monero wasn't a scam and they actually did something that was worthwhile, that would have been copied by Bitcoin. Right, the only reason that it wouldn't be copied by Bitcoin is either if it's stupid or if the Bitcoin developers are stupid. But even the Monero guys are not going to say that the Bitcoin developers aren't 5 times smarter than them, right? So you really have to run to some pretty crazy conspiracies around lizard people in order to think that these altcoins make any sense.
That's interesting. I'm going to be very interested to see the reaction from our listeners and stuff like that, because I think, especially I was wishing my other host would be here because he is a heavy altcoin guy. So I was hoping he'd be here to refute a couple of your claims here. But anyway, let's move on. I really appreciate your time. That's a lot of stuff to digest. I want to, before we get going, give you an opportunity to talk about your project with MathBot, what you're trying to accomplish there, and then we'll wrap up.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, man. So MathBot is, if you go out to mathbot.com, you'll be able to play it in a couple seconds. You don't have to pay or do anything difficult to check it out. So please do that. But the goal of MathBot is to make math and programming so fun and easy that it's the go-to place. Particularly what we want to do is we want to get math and programming out of public and private schools. Government-regulated schools just make math and programming miserable, just like the DMV makes driving miserable. Government-regulated schools make math and programming awful. So if you think that you hate math and programming, I promise you don't. Your brain, as a human brain, is hardwired to love problem solving, to love puzzles, to love everything that math and programming is. What you don't like is the government version of that. But if you like driving, don't think that that you're going to love the DMV, right? It's not math and programming what you actually got in those schools. So the goal is just to make that clear and really to get schools to stop. And we've had some success already. We've had some schools adopting MathBot. If you go on my Twitter profile, there's about 40 kids in a public school in New Jersey that are all playing MathBot. And to us, that's a huge win. I mean, there are some good teachers out there, but the good teachers will be the ones that direct kids to this website and just get out of the way so that they can actually have a good time and have fun learning math and programming instead of being tortured. But that's the goal, to just get these guys out of there. The public schools, the private schools that are government regulated don't do it well, and we do, and it's fun. So soon you'll be able to reward your kids in Bitcoin.
That's cool.
For example, if you have a 9-year-old and they're struggling with math and programming, or math more likely, you basically buy a bunch of levels for $20, and then the kid, as they pass levels, will be given 90% of that money back. So 10% of it goes to supporting the software, reward people that have volunteered on the project, basically, but 90% goes to the kid. So it's $22, and they pass 100 levels. They get a few, maybe a quarter per level until they get $20.
That's pretty cool. I think that is really innovative, and I think that could be a huge home run. My brother has a 8-year-old, and I'm going to tell him about it and see if he can teach his 8-year-old some better math. So
awesome, man. Awesome. Yeah, that's
cool.
Great.
So JW, I really appreciate your time. And I thank you for coming on. I think that was a pretty awesome, important conversation. Where else can people find you? Who do you want to hear from? Who do you not want to hear from?
So I am on Twitter, at JW_Weatherman_. And I'm pretty much happy to hear from anybody. I'm particularly interested in anybody that has kids that are maybe diagnosed with learning disabilities, or they're on the Asperger's syndrome spectrum or anything like that. There's nothing funner for me than having one of those parents or one of those kids reach out to me and start playing MathBot and realize that no, they don't need to be one of the 10 to 20% of kids in the United States that are chemically lobotomized because they don't want to do really boring, stupid work. So if you fall into that category, you're at the top of the list of people I want to hear from. But I'm happy to hear from anybody. If you want to debate altcoins, the only thing that I would ask is that you don't waste my time. You invest 10 hours into knowing what you're talking about by going out to 10hoursofbitcoin.com. Just burn through the material, and then I'm more than happy to answer any of your questions or debate about the next coin and how awesome it's going to be.
Awesome, man. Well, again, we appreciate your time. Everyone else, we will be back next week with, I think, the whole crew, hopefully. But until next time, don't get wrecked, and that is financial advice.